It's one of the most violating things that can happen to a person, being betrayed by someone you put your trust in, especially when it's the person that's supposed to be helping you. When they say nothing worth having comes easy, they weren't lying. But sometimes the cost of what we want is more than we bargained for. And that's exactly what happened to 27-year-old Kaylee Anthony after she was brutally assaulted at work. She just didn't know it yet. All Kaylee wanted was to find someone who could help her fight back against the corporation that not only did nothing about her complaints of sexual harassment, but fired her as soon as her attacker was given the opportunity. But after she met Wade, she felt like she finally found the right person. But before she could listen to them, he made her an offer she couldn't refuse. She was desperate for answers and for justice. And he was the only one who could give that to her. So she decided to trust him and sign the papers without thinking twice. And that's when her nightmares began. Her instincts screamed at her that something was wrong, that he wasn't the man she thought he was. But she ignored them, pushing them down with thoughts of revenge. If she'd only known the truth about Wade, she never would have stepped foot into his office. She would have kept running, kept hiding, kept doing whatever it took to avoid him. But she didn't know. She trusted him. She believed in him. But no one could have imagined what was really happening behind that closed door. According to investigators, they were able to retrieve security footage that showed Kaylee leaving Wade's office alone. He stood up from his chair and walked towards Kaylee, who was still sitting on the edge of his desk, oblivious to the danger that was lurking just a few feet away from her. Her eyelids grew heavy, her vision blurred, and her entire body slumped in a way that made it clear she was in trouble. Her clothes were torn, her body ached, and her mind was in shock. She tried to call for help, but her voice was hoarse and weak. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. She was a shell of her former self, haunted by the horrors of what had happened to her. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. She tried to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. She was helpless, trapped in a world of pain and fear. It was then that she realized what had happened. She had been violated, assaulted, and betrayed by the one person she had trusted to help her. She was all alone. No one was coming to save her. She was on her own. And that terrified her. All she remembered was a brief struggle, a muffled scream, and then darkness. She never saw it coming. She never heard the danger. People looked at her as if she were the one who was at fault, as if she had brought this upon herself. And in the process, she became a beacon of hope for other survivors of sexual assault. She became a voice for those who could not speak for themselves. She became a warrior for those who had been silenced. They whispered behind her back, judging her and tearing her down. It was like she was living in a nightmare from which there was no escape. She never felt the trap closing in on her until it was too late. Before she could even react, he was upon her, injecting her with a sedative that would render her unconscious in mere seconds. They stated that the two appeared to be on good terms. They talked and laughed together as they walked out into the hallway. And in the end, it almost cost her everything. All she wanted was to punish those who had wronged her. It was the same condescending smirk, the same piercing stare, the same cruel smile that had haunted her nightmares. But it wasn't just that. There was something else, something in his eyes that sent chills down her spine. It was the look of a predator who had just found his prey. The look of a man who was ready to strike. And he was the key to that. But as the days turned into weeks, she started to realize that she might have made a huge mistake. The first time she saw him, he had this charming smile that could melt butter. The real story was a horror show that no one could have ever imagined. The moment the door closed behind Kaylee, Wade's demeanor shifted. The charming, charismatic lawyer vanished, leaving in his place a cold, calculating predator. He leaned back in his chair, a sinister smile creeping onto his face. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now gleamed with a terrifying light. She remembered the whispers in the hallway, the leers from her boss, and the jokes that were cracked at her expense. It was like a dam had broken inside her mind and all of the repressed memories were coming to the surface. At first, it was just snippets here and there. But then those fragments turned into full-blown flashbacks. She saw the disgust on her colleagues' faces, heard the snickers in the break room, and felt the violation of her boss's touch. But then those little inconveniences turned into full-blown disasters. She was horrified. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the signs? Why didn't anyone help her? And most importantly, why was Wade keeping her from getting justice? His usual charm and charisma were replaced by a cold, calculating stare that seemed to pierce through her soul. He was still handsome, but now there was a darkness in his eyes that terrified her. Not only did the case take way longer than he promised, but now she was also starting to forget things that had happened at the office that day. Little things like her boss trying to rub her shoulders or his hand lingering on her thigh just a little too long. And the victims weren't praising him left and right. Instead, many of them came forward with accusations that he was the one who assaulted them. They claimed that he used his power and influence to take advantage of them when they were at their most vulnerable. And the worst part was that none of those cases were ever solved. He either settled out of court or somehow managed to get the charges dropped. Those incidents suddenly became just a blur. It was like her mind was protecting her from something. Something terrible. In fact, everyone who ever met the man said he was the best attorney that they ever hired. And the reviews online were filled with praises of his abilities. If you asked anyone who knew him, they'd all say the same thing. Wade was a good guy. He was reliable, trustworthy, and kind. And he would never hurt a fly, so she thought. He wore a crisp suit, carried himself well, and even offered her free advice. He made her feel important. And most importantly, he exuded calm authority. As he explained how he was going to help her get her job back and make her attackers pay, Kaylee couldn't help but let her guard down around him. After all, he looked like the kind of man who would never hurt a fly, let alone do anything to jeopardize his reputation. So she decided to trust him and hire him as her attorney. But little did she know that behind the briefcase and perfectly polished words was a monster that was just waiting to strike. And then everything started to go wrong. At first, it was just small things like missed calls and canceled meetings. Her instincts were screaming at her to run away from this man because he was dangerous. As the days passed, Kaylee's memories started coming back in flashes. Every time she tried to piece together what had happened, she remembered more and more details until she had a clear picture of how she was being tormented at work. The more time she spent with him, the worse she felt. After all, according to a report from a local news station, he had a history of dealing with sexual assault cases. If only she had known better. If only she had listened to her gut feeling. Then maybe she could have avoided what happened next. When his face appeared on the screen, she froze. According to witnesses, they saw her enter his office and never come out. Some say they heard screams, others say they saw a struggle. But that was far from the truth. With a few swift movements, he pulled out a syringe from his briefcase, filled it with a clear liquid, and capped it. As the drug coursed through her veins, she felt a sudden wave of drowsiness wash over her. According to the investigation, when she woke up, she was lying on a table in a dark, dank room. As she struggled to come to terms with the trauma of her assault, she realized that she was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. And the worst part was that she was all alone. That's when the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. When she finally managed to escape, she stumbled out of the building, her body battered and bruised, her mind shattered and traumatized. When she sought help from others, she was met with disbelief, shame, and blame. But she refused to give up. She fought back, she sought justice, and she survived.